tissues and crying and crying. And then I thought, look, I've got to get a grip here and do something useful for Diana. And I decided the first thing that needed to be done was to find somebody to write and deliver the eulogy.
The ballroom falls silent the instant Charles Spencer folds the speech everyone expected him to read. Across the room, Queen Camilla watches with quiet confidence, believing the evening is unfolding exactly as planned. But here's the thing. Spencer never reaches for the official remarks. Instead, he looks directly at the audience and begins speaking from the heart, and the atmosphere changes in seconds. What nobody expected was how one emotional story would ripple through the entire gala, leaving guests stunned and cameras scrambling. So what really happened inside that gala? And before we uncover every twist, what do you think Charles was about to reveal? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because this story is only getting started. When the script collapsed, and here's where the evening took a turn nobody inside that glittering ballroom could have predicted. Spencer stood a few steps from the podium, the folded speech resting in his hand. Above him, chandeliers cast a golden glow across floors, crystal glasses shimmered beneath candlelight, and a string quartet filled the room as guests settled into silence. Everything had been rehearsed. Every introduction, camera angle, and applause was designed to deliver a message: unity. But the moment Spencer looked toward the memorial display, something inside him shifted. Okay, so let's talk about what caught his attention. The tribute celebrated decades of charitable work connected to the Royal Foundation. Photographs filled illuminated panels, while captions praised its commitment to public service. It was beautiful on the surface, yet as Spencer's eyes moved across the display, he noticed something unsettling. Familiar moments had vanished. Faces he remembered beside Diana during charity visits had been replaced with newer portraits. Chapters of her humanitarian journey had been reduced to sentences that felt distant, as if the real woman had become a symbol. Nobody else seemed to notice. Queen Camilla, seated near King Charles, exchanged polite smiles with diplomats and charity patrons, confident the evening was unfolding as planned. She glanced toward the podium, expecting a speech about remembrance and reconciliation. Around her, photographers prepared cameras while producers counted down to the broadcast. To everyone watching, this appeared to be another gala, but here's where everything changed. Spencer unfolded the prepared speech one time. His eyes scanned the opening paragraph before he exhaled. Then he folded the pages again, placed them inside his jacket, and walked toward the microphone carrying his thoughts. The gesture was noticed by the front rows. A palace aide frowned. Another whispered into a headset. A producer checked the program, certain there had been a mistake. What nobody understood was that Spencer had made his decision before reaching the stage. Standing behind the podium, he remained silent. His gaze moved across the ballroom, toward volunteers, charity workers, journalists, and young guests who knew Diana through images and documentaries. The silence stretched longer than expected. It was not awkward. It was intentional, the kind of silence that forced everyone to listen. Even Queen Camilla's expression changed. Her confident smile faded into curiosity as she glanced toward King Charles, but he remained still. Around them, conversation stopped, instruments lowered, and hundreds of eyes focused on Spencer. Then he reached for the microphone, not as someone delivering a rehearsed tribute, but as someone ready to reveal a story that could never appear in a program. And the first sentence he spoke would make everyone realize they had misunderstood the purpose of the evening from the beginning. Why would Charles Spencer abandon a carefully approved tribute in front of Britain's most powerful guests? What had he noticed that made the official version suddenly impossible to deliver? And as his first unexpected words echoed through the silent hall, was he about to expose something the palace desperately wanted buried? Let's find out. One promise changed everything forever. And the very first sentence Spencer spoke erased every expectation the audience had carried into that ballroom. "I wasn't planning to tell you about royalty tonight," he began quietly. "I came here to tell you about a promise. Wrapping break." The words landed with surprising weight. They weren't dramatic or confrontational, yet they changed the atmosphere. Cameras zoomed closer. Reporters hesitated, unsure whether to follow the printed program or whatever this speech was becoming. Queen Camilla straightened in her chair, her expression calm but noticeably alert. Even King Charles leaned forward slightly. So, why did those few words carry so much weight? Spencer wasn't looking toward the royal table anymore. His attention settled on elderly charity volunteers seated near the back of the ballroom. They had spent decades organizing hospital visits, fundraising events, and community outreach programs. Their names rarely appeared in headlines, yet they had witnessed moments the public never would. "Years ago," he said, "someone very close to me told me that history isn't only written by famous people. It's protected by ordinary people who refuse to forget." He recalled a rainy afternoon after a children's charity event, when Diana stayed long after photographers packed away their cameras. No speeches or headlines were waiting outside. She sat beside volunteers, asked about their families, remembered their names, and thanked them for work that would never make the evening news. According to Spencer, she left him with a thought he never forgot. The smallest stories are usually the ones people try hardest to erase, but that's when everything shifted. Guests who expected another polished royal celebration suddenly found themselves thinking about people instead of protocol. Former volunteers exchanged quiet glances. One elderly woman lowered her eyes as though she recognized the moment Spencer described. Queen Camilla noticed the shift. Her attention drifted from the podium to the audience. Instead of polite applause and predictable smiles, she saw thoughtful, unsettled faces. But here's where the speech took on a deeper meaning. Spencer turned toward the illuminated memorial display that welcomed guests into the ballroom. Without criticizing it directly, he asked a single question. "Have you noticed how easily a memory changes when enough small details quietly disappear?" Instead, guests studied the display with fresh eyes. They whispered about missing photographs, searched old notes, and tried to remember stories they hadn't considered in years. Spencer wasn't accusing anyone. He was asking everyone to question the difference between preserving history and polishing it. Queen Camilla sensed the evening slipping beyond control, but still believed it could be recovered. She had no idea someone among the charity guests was holding a forgotten photograph that would soon transform Spencer's words into something nobody inside the ballroom could ignore before the night. One memory can challenge an entire legacy. But what did Diana once tell Spencer that made ordinary lives impossible to forget? Why did one guest suddenly realize the speech was becoming dangerously personal? And when Spencer finally turned toward her, what truth was he about to expose? Keep watching.
Witnesses changed the narrative.
Before anyone could respond to Spencer's question, something unexpected happened. A chair scraped softly across the polished ballroom floor. It wasn't loud, but in a room that had fallen completely silent, every head turned toward the sound. An elderly woman near the back slowly rose to her feet, clutching a small invitation card with trembling hands. She wasn't a royal guest or a public figure. She was one of the longtime charity volunteers Spencer had noticed earlier. At first, everyone assumed she was leaving. Instead, she looked toward the stage. "I remember that day," she said quietly. Her voice barely carried across the ballroom, yet somehow it reached every corner. Cameras instinctively turned toward her. Microphones shifted away from the podium, searching for the unexpected speaker. Now, this is where everything took on a much deeper meaning. The evening had been carefully built around one voice, Spencer's. Every speech, every applause break, every transition had been planned. But nobody expected the audience to become part of the story. The volunteer smiled through tears as she recalled a hospital visit years earlier. After the photographers had left, Diana noticed a frightened child sitting alone by a window. Without hesitation, she sat beside the child and spent nearly an hour talking, laughing, and drawing pictures. There were no cameras, no headlines, Just a quiet act of kindness that transformed one family's life. When she finished, the ballroom remained silent. Then someone else stood. A former charity coordinator shared another memory. Diana, he explained, refused to accept public praise until every volunteer had been recognized first. People remember kindness longer than ceremonies, he recalled, his voice breaking. This is where things became even more significant. Instead of sitting back down, more guests slowly rose to their feet. A retired nurse, a youth mentor, a fundraising organizer. None had planned to speak, yet together their stories created a portrait of Diana far richer than the official tribute. The atmosphere transformed almost instantly. Journalists abandoned their prepared notes. Television producers ignored the schedule. Even photographers lowered their cameras, realizing no single image could capture what was unfolding. Across the room, palace officials exchanged uneasy glances. One coordinator whispered into a headset. Another signaled the orchestra to prepare. But even the musicians hesitated, captivated by the memories filling the room. By then, the official program no longer mattered. Then, just as another volunteer prepared to speak, a man near the front opened a worn leather portfolio and carefully lifted out an old photograph. The moment Spencer saw it, his expression changed completely, and everyone in the ballroom sensed the next revelation would be impossible to forget. And then, a voice rises from the crowd, followed by another. Why are these former volunteers suddenly breaking protocol? What does the forgotten photograph reveal about Diana's legacy? And why does Camilla's expression change the moment it reaches the stage, turning one emotional tribute into something far more dangerous? Stay with us. Forgotten photograph shattered. Palace narrative. The photograph never should have been there. As the final volunteer finished speaking, a man near the front quietly slipped a faded photograph from the worn leather portfolio he had guarded all evening. He didn't raise it for attention or make a dramatic gesture. He simply held it with both hands, as though time itself might damage it. Spencer noticed it immediately, and the warmth in his expression faded into quiet disbelief. Around the ballroom, conversation stopped. Even Queen Camilla leaned forward, trying to understand how one old photograph had suddenly captured the entire room. Okay, so let's talk about what made that image so extraordinary. It wasn't glamorous. There were no palace balconies, royal uniforms, or grand ceremonies. Instead, Diana sat cross-legged on the floor of a modest community center, surrounded by children painting colorful handprints across large sheets of paper. Her sleeves were rolled up, paint covered her hands, and she was laughing so naturally it felt more like a private family memory than a royal engagement. Behind her stood volunteers whose faces had never appeared in official exhibitions or commemorative books. The charity organizer looked toward Spencer before speaking. "I've carried this photograph for nearly 3 decades, he said. Not because it's rare, but because it reminds me who she truly was when nobody expected her to perform. His words settled over the ballroom like a gentle wave. Then the focus changed entirely. Guests began leaving their tables one by one, drawn instinctively toward the photograph. Diplomats stood beside retired nurses. Charity patrons stood shoulder to shoulder with journalists. Nobody seemed concerned with etiquette anymore. They simply wanted a closer look. The organizers, who had spent months perfecting the evening's memorial display, realized the crowd was no longer studying the carefully illuminated exhibition. They were looking at one worn photograph. Journalists abandoned prepared headlines. Reporters focused on the photograph instead of the royal stage, while camera operators quietly repositioned themselves to capture the genuine emotion unfolding before them. Queen Camilla watched with growing unease. She realized the room had moved beyond the palace's carefully crafted narrative. No confrontation had occurred. No accusations had been made. Yet the audience had quietly chosen which story it wanted to remember. And this is where it gets interesting. Charles Spencer accepted the photograph and held it beside the official tribute. He didn't invite comparisons. He didn't need to. One celebrated an institution, the other captured compassion. As quiet applause spread through the room, An event coordinator hurried onto the stage, carrying a sealed envelope marked "Special Announcement." The moment Spencer saw the signature, he knew the night was about to take another unexpected turn. What could possibly follow a photograph that has already left the entire ballroom speechless? Why does the next announcement suddenly make every conversation stop? And what secret connection is about to turn Diana's emotional tribute into something far more unexpected than anyone anticipated? Stay glued. One speech sparked global action. The ballroom had barely settled after the applause when the event coordinator stepped onto the stage holding a sealed envelope. Guests expected an announcement that would restore the evening's carefully planned schedule. Instead, Spencer accepted the envelope, glanced at the signature, and calmly placed it unopened on the podium. "I think," he said with a gentle smile, "we've heard enough prepared words for one night." Warm laughter rippled through the room, followed by the loudest applause of the evening. Let's break down why that moment resonated so deeply. The gala had been built around precision. Every speech, performance, and charitable announcement had its place. But by setting the envelope aside, Spencer changed far more than the schedule. He changed the atmosphere. People stopped waiting to be guided. They wanted to become part of the evening themselves. But this was only the beginning. A respected charity director rose from her table without notes or introduction. Looking toward Spencer, she quietly said, "If tonight is truly about remembering compassion, then memories alone aren't enough." She paused. "We should continue the work." Those words unlocked something throughout the ballroom. Another guest immediately pledged support for a children's health initiative inspired by Diana's community work. Moments later, a business leader committed funding for volunteer training centers. Then a hospital trustee offered new resources for family support services. None of these commitments had been scheduled. None had been coordinated. Yet they kept coming. Without anyone realizing it, the gala stopped celebrating the past and started building the future. Journalists noticed immediately. Headlines planned around royal speeches were abandoned as reporters focused on the unexpected wave of generosity. Camera crews left the stage to capture each new pledge, while social media feeds filled with ordinary guests making extraordinary commitments. The story was no longer the gala. It was what the gala had inspired. Across the ballroom, Queen Camilla watched in growing disbelief. She hadn't lost attention through controversy, but to something far more powerful, genuine emotion. Every spontaneous pledge shifted the spotlight further from the evening's original purpose. King Charles remained silent, watching guests transform from spectators into participants. Conversations turned from royal appearances to schools, hospitals, volunteers, and community projects. Hope had replaced the ceremony, and no carefully planned schedule could reverse it. And this is where it gets interesting. Spencer looked across the room, clearly moved. For a moment, it seemed he would finally step away. Instead, he reached into his jacket one last time. He unfolded a handwritten note no one had seen before. His smile disappeared. The ballroom fell silent, because everyone sensed the message he was about to share was the one he had been carrying all along. The applause had faded, yet Diana's name was suddenly moving through the room in ways no one had planned. Why were donations multiplying? Who was quietly turning grief into action? And what did Charles Spencer say next that made the entire evening take an even more unexpected turn? History refused to stay silent. The silence that settled over the ballroom felt different this time. It wasn't the uneasy silence that followed Spencer's first unexpected words. It wasn't the emotional hush after the forgotten photograph or the spontaneous pledges. This silence carried anticipation. Hundreds of guests sat motionless as Spencer unfolded the handwritten note he had kept hidden all evening. Even the musicians lowered their instruments once more, sensing the night's defining moment had arrived. Spencer glanced down at the page, then quietly folded it shut. "I don't need to read this," he said softly. "I already know what it says." The words echoed across the ballroom. Okay, so let's talk about why that mattered. Throughout the evening, many had expected dramatic revelations or pointed accusations. Instead, Spencer guided everyone towards something deeper. He wasn't interested in deciding who deserved praise or blame. He wanted them to consider a far more difficult question. How should history remember people? Not as flawless heroes, not as perfect symbols, but as real human beings whose lives touched countless others. But here's where everything shifted. Spencer stepped away from the podium and moved toward the memorial display that had sparked the evening's debate. One side showcased polished photographs and carefully curated royal history. The other was filled with volunteers, nurses, teachers, charity workers, and families, sharing memories no exhibition could truly capture. He paused between them. "This," he said, gesturing toward both sides of the room, "isn't a choice." Guests exchanged puzzled glances. "We don't honor someone by replacing one story with another. We honor them by having the courage to remember every chapter honestly. The beautiful moments, the difficult ones, the celebrated victories, and the quiet acts of kindness nobody thought to record." The ballroom remained still. Queen Camilla lowered her eyes. She wasn't watching the audience or the cameras anymore. She simply listened. Spencer wasn't asking anyone to surrender their place in history. He was asking everyone to make room for a fuller one. Volunteers quietly reached for one another's hands. A veteran royal journalist closed her notebook. A young guest wiped away tears. Even palace officials stopped whispering into their headsets. There was nothing left to interrupt. Then Spencer turned toward Queen Camilla and King Charles, offering neither criticism nor triumph. Every generation inherits a story. The question isn't whether we protect it. The question is whether we protect all of it. A single pair of hands began clapping. Others followed until the entire ballroom rose in applause. Queen Camilla stood quietly in reflection, while King Charles offered a respectful nod. As dawn reached newsrooms around the world, it became clear the speech wouldn't be remembered as the night's biggest story. What happened after the guests went home would ensure the gala was talked about for years to come. The ovation eventually faded, but the words did not. By morning, Spencer's appeal had traveled far beyond the gala, reaching people who had been waiting years for someone to say it aloud. Then, something happened that transformed one emotional speech into a national reckoning. Who reacted first, and why? One night changed royal legacy. As the applause finally faded, something unexpected happened. Nobody rushed toward the exits. Usually, the end of a royal gala followed a familiar pattern. Guests exchanged polite handshakes. Photographers captured final smiles, and luxury cars waited beneath flashing cameras. But this evening refused to follow tradition. Instead of leaving, people remained throughout the ballroom, still discussing the stories they had just heard. And that's when Spencer quietly stepped away from the podium. He didn't wait for more applause. He didn't stop for reporters or photographs. He simply offered one final grateful smile to the volunteers who had unexpectedly become the heart of the evening, before walking toward the side entrance. Okay, so let's talk about what happened after he left. The remarkable part wasn't only that Spencer had delivered a memorable speech, it was that the conversation continued without him. Guests introduced themselves to strangers. Charity workers shared old photographs. Former volunteers exchanged memories they had not discussed for years. Younger attendees listened as older generations revealed moments that had never appeared in documentaries or official records. The ballroom had transformed. Hours earlier, it had been a place of elegance, ceremony, and carefully prepared speeches. Now, it felt like a reunion of people, connected by one powerful belief: that genuine kindness deserves to survive long after the headlines disappear. But then something even bigger happened. The next morning, media outlets around the world prepared their coverage of the gala. Editors expected stories about royal appearances, fashion, and formal speeches. Instead, the headlines changed overnight. The focus shifted away from protocol. It shifted toward compassion. Television reports highlighted the volunteers, charity. Organizations revealed a sudden increase in support. Community groups received messages from people inspired to get involved. Across social media, The most shared image was not the royal decorations or grand ceremony. It was the photograph of Diana sitting beside children, smiling with paint on her hands. Nobody expected one emotional moment to create such a powerful reaction. Within days, schools organized volunteer programs. Hospitals announced community partnerships. Charities that had struggled quietly for years suddenly found themselves receiving new attention. The gala had ended, but its impact was only beginning. Queen Camilla watched the reaction from a distance. Even King Charles understood the world's attention had turned away from ceremony and towards simple acts of humanity. Weeks later, visitors still arrived at the community center connected to that forgotten photograph. Spencer never called the evening a victory. He simply said that if people remembered kindness more than ceremony, then the evening had achieved everything it needed to. Perhaps that became its greatest legacy. So, what do you think? Did Charles Spencer's heartfelt speech prove that authentic memories matter more than carefully planned royal ceremonies? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more royal stories.